Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for having me, and thank you for staying this late. I know there's been like a full couple of days where um, we've seen cloud solutions, we've seen software to monitor both on-prem and cloud infrastructure. We've seen like AI, machine learning. We've seen various challenges in the data analytics space and BI. However, how does that all fit in? And the reason I'm here today is I'd like to walk you through um, a roadmap that we've seen. Being a consulting and implementation company, we are dealing with lots of customers of any size, very different industries, starting from startups and up to enterprises. And we've seen different challenges in terms of adopting data analytics. So the objective of this presentation is to present you with a roadmap for adopting data analytics according to the size of the company and the level of maturity, and to also kind of pinpoint some of the pitfalls and challenges that you can meet in each of these environments. But before starting, a little bit of words about ourselves. This is our team. As Tatiana mentioned, we are a data analytics consulting and implementation company. Most of our work resides around reporting and dashboards, machine learning, and of course, building all the infrastructure, necessary infrastructure up front so that the dashboards are accurate and are being monitored and the data is available for our users, right? Okay. Adopting data analytics, can be a very messy process, especially that not all the companies are startups. You don't get the benefit of starting from scratch, having a clean slate and just adopt all the latest technologies. Most often than not, you might find yourself having like on-prem infrastructure, old databases, old systems. You might be dealing with a hybrid environment, right? So the challenges would be very different there. But before we dive into the specific challenges, I'd like a show of hands. Who's working in a startup? Could I get a show of hands? Okay, so not that many people. I'm gonna skip faster over that part. Who's working in a medium-sized company? Okay, few people. And who's working in an enterprise? Okay, lots of people. I'm very glad. Okay. Then the first challenge is, speaking of startups usually, when they need to adopt data analytics, most often than not what they do is they focus very much on building a product and bringing it to the market. So of course, building new features, testing it, making sure that it has no bugs, it's a top priority from a technical point of view. So building out dashboards and analytics and reports that are useful both to them and to some of the stakeholders they're working with, such as investors, is not necessarily a very high priority. So one of the most common pitfalls that I've seen here is what they do is that they try to build reporting themselves. They use like backend, they build a backend and front end, get the data from their database, try to code it themselves. And then most often they're not, they find themselves talking to their investors or talking to their partners. For instance, if we're talking about a marketplace, and they start getting lots and lots of change requests and iterating through visualizations and reports in order to fit all of those needs when you're not using a BI platform is very challenging and very time consuming and also very costly, because rather than having your developers spend time on actually building a better product, you keep them busy building dashboards, right? So what we recommend here is, when speaking of adoption, there's like a couple of ways to go about it. It's either you get like a data analyst, a generalist one. You might need a more senior person that would kind of be able to face and deal with all the challenges that you would encounter. But I think the recommended approach is to go for external providers that can help you on like very specific matters, exactly when you need it. Let's just say you prepare to have a talk with your investors, you prepare for a pitch, you prepare for an accelerator, And we've seen in our experience that venture capitalists and angel investors appreciate a lot startups that can show and prove with analytics what they look like and what their product is doing and the traction and user retention and paid users and so on and so forth, right? So they tend to appreciate that a lot. So our recommendation is go to ask for specialized help, very punctual whenever you need it. What else? Let's see. So yeah, the second thing that we recommend in terms of tools, being a startup, you have firstly the luxury of being able to go cloud first, which we highly do recommend because adopting cloud is going to scale both horizontally and vertically for your solution and keep up with the development and the adoption of your solution. And secondly, one of the most easy to adopt BI tools in terms of reporting is Power BI. It's very cheap. The license is extremely cheap. It's extremely affordable. It's not increasingly very difficult to work with. And whenever you would decide to kind of in-source building additional dashboards, there's like plenty of support. There's plenty of documentation, quite similar to, I don't know, Excel. And it's going to make your life way, way easier. Some other stuff to pay attention to is whenever you're building, so we don't have that many people working in startups, but also it goes the same for new products. Whenever you're building a new product, it's worth so at the very beginning, the product does not have users, does not have data. You have like a cold start type of problem. So from this point of view, it's worth sitting down to some data analytics experts just to have a conversation about the structure of the database that you want to put in place. Because one small change that you may do right now is going to affect you 2 years down the line when you're going to need a specific type of analysis or a specific type of metric, and you find yourself that you haven't been storing and saving the necessary data for you to be able to compute that measurement. Not to mention that you're going to need historical data for machine learning algorithms, and you're going to find yourself not having the necessary data. So you're going to like have to redesign, refactor the database, and then start collecting data from that point on, which is kind of painful, right? So 2 years of a little bit of checking with specialists might save you a lot of pain. I mentioned don't code BI yourself. Don't try to build reports, and only if it's worth building them, only if they are supposed to, at a certain point in time, be embedded in your product. That is a scenario when you should be building them. However, at first, it's worth iterating in BI, in data visualization tools, getting user feedback from your partners, from your stakeholders, from your investors, from everybody else. And once everybody agreed to the way the report should look like, that's when you should think of migrating it and coding it yourself and embedding it into your product. Yeah, I mentioned keeping an eye on making sure that the infrastructure scales both horizontally and vertically. And very important, avoid data silos. This is something that we've seen, for instance, with some of the startups we're working in, especially the ones that are doing B2B type of software. And because of urgencies, because of requests, there was this partner that started customizing their product and maintain multiple versions of their product that, of course, had various different schemas behind, and it was very difficult to aggregate everything in one place in order to build reports on top of. So this is something that clearly we don't recommend. Maintain as little versions of your software as possible. Now, I've laid here some of the metrics that they would need, a startup would need, either for themselves, for their own internal consumption, for the stakeholders and potential investors, or for partners and customers if we're talking about the marketplace. So all of these metrics can be very easily computed in a data analytics dashboard. No problem and no challenge here. Moving on, we're moving on to the mid-sized company, right? Mid-sized companies reach an inflection point where the data scales, it starts to be larger, and that's the moment when we say like Excel is no longer enough. Excel is no longer enough, Google Sheets is no longer enough. Everybody is starting arguing about different versions of the data, different versions of the reports. They can't no longer agree on the numbers they're looking at. So they start to feel the need for a centralized solution that would feed everybody with the necessary data. From this point of view, it's in terms of building a data analytics team. Now you are presented with a couple of options. Either this is the time where you could be insourcing the activity and do it yourself. It's maybe the time to build a data analytics department of yourself, or you can reach back to the external consulting provider that you were working with in order to ask for dedicated resources, ask for dedicated engineers, ask for dedicated availability, prioritization, and everything that you need in order to make sure that your data analytics environment is going to properly support your business operations. In terms of tools, now is the time. I mean, I've laid down here, of course, there's like many options, but from the very large established providers, we're still recommending Microsoft Power BI. We're also recommending Tableau this time because it allows for a greater degree of customization. You can have like custom visuals, more exotic type of dashboards, more exotic type of charts of infographics and so on. So that gives you more flexibility. And some of the aspects to pay attention to is usually a mid-sized company, like small to mid-sized companies, they would have already in-sourced traditional IT. So they would have like a sysadmin, they would have somebody to look out for their servers and infrastructure. But that traditional IT would not be like very open and keen and enthusiastic about taking on the additional responsibility of building data analytics. So you have to appreciate and recognize when you need specialized data analytics expertise apart from the traditional IT expertise that you've been having. Secondly, this is a time when you start to feel the need for a unified data source, and this is usually the time when companies would also start talking about the need for a data warehouse. That's the time when like your CRM data together with your ERP data, your finance data, your operations data, your logs and everything should come into one single place, because that's the point where you'll need to feed your users and your decision makers and your analysts with the necessary data that they need from a centralized, curated, single source of truth place. The third point is, okay, we're adopting data analytics. We're talking about a business, a data warehouse or a data lake. However, where do we start from? And this might sound like a very simple question, but it's a question that if you don't get right, it might cost a lot down the line. And there's a couple of projects that we've seen in the data analytics space. There's this philosophy, there's this like school of thought. Let's just build a data lake, put everything in there. Who knows when we're gonna need it, right? I've seen especially very large companies building a data lake, like a long promised data lake that's already taking 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. Everybody has heard of it. Everybody knows that it's coming, but nobody saw it, right? And we think that is not necessarily the right way to approach this problem. We think that it should all start with strategy, start with the key objectives. So the whole discussion should start from the strategic objectives of the company. What do we want to achieve? What are our pains? What is it that we want to optimize? Do we have an attrition problem? Because if we don't have an attrition problem, we might have a cash flow problem. We might have like a large inventories type of problem, right? And the reason I'm mentioning this is, so usually the types of integrations necessary to have, like, to extract all the data and have it available for reporting takes a long time. Like, whoever has had to get data from an ERP knows what I'm talking about. It can have like multiple data points, multiple endpoints, lots of data to pull from there. So what do we pull? We come back to the strategy. What does the company want to optimize and want to improve? If they want to improve inventory, then we should start with the ERP and getting the inventory data. Then match it with financial data, and there we have it, the first monitoring tool that allows people to kind of understand where we have some date loss, some dead loss, right? And where we could improve our inventories from. So strategy first, this is the point. Of course, this is the point. At this point, the company is already thinking about scalable infrastructure. Bear in mind that the infrastructure should scale both up and down. Usually when we think of scaling, we think of scaling up. We think of like the optimistic scenario where the company is going to get better, the revenue is going to increase, we're going to get more and more customers. However, there are times that when we're hit with like the environment that we're currently in with high interest rates, debt becomes more expensive. So that is a time when you kind of need to also think of scaling down and reaching and turning to your defendable core and keep on pushing through in order to be resilient. So make sure that whatever you adopt can be also scaled down, especially in terms of costs. Data auditing, this is a point where data auditing is no longer an option. There needs to be a very clear traceability with respect to accountability, who's accountable for what data source and for what data, and they should be properly trained and made aware that the changes they do impacts everything and some other users in unseen matters. Trainings and awareness and walking all the users through the process and make them understand how one small change they do affects some other stakeholders' dashboards is very important. One very important point that we like to stress a lot, now it all depends on the digital maturity of the company, but with some of our customers, we always say that usually BI and data visualizations is a means, is not a goal. We don't build dashboards for the sake of building dashboards and for the sake of having a look at the analytics. And what I mean by that is that the company should also focus on making sure that their data is actionable. What I mean by that is let's have the data make decisions. After we've put in place a report showing where we are, showing the diagnostics, showing the top offenders, showing the problems, let's just build algorithms and decision-making algorithms that feed back into the systems to correct data or to make decisions or to make stuff happen. Because we've seen very frequently, some of our customers are asking for dashboards, and then we find that a person needs to go there and download the data and do something with it, after which they kind of start making decisions and act on some other third-party system. We're like, then the idea we're proposing here is, let's just build a dashboard so you're confident enough that we're looking at the right problem, that we define it correctly, and then when we are happy with, or we understood the actions that, or the things that should happen next, let's build integrations directly into the tools. Let's monitor them, test them out, build a pilot project, and once we're happy with them, let's just connect them to the underlying tools, let them make decisions. And I mean like change deliveries, move orders, switch inventories, and decisions like that, right? And the last point I've added here is one other aspect for a mid-sized company to be careful about is integration and adoption. Make sure that whatever you're planning to integrate and further add on to your stack can be integrated with the current stack of technologies you have as easy as possible. This is also some criteria to take into account whenever considering to adopt a new tool or a new platform and stuff like that. I've laid down here, now I know that like we're lots of data professionals in the room, but I also lay down here a reminder of how you build a data analytics department. Usually everything starts off with a data analyst, the person that can guide the users, do analysis, present the analysis to them, but usually at this point in time, the analyses are static, not connected to the underlying data sources and not connected to the underlying infrastructure, which is why our second recommendation is to bring in, so whenever the process is too manual and takes too long, that is the moment to recognize that you need a data engineer. So just bear in mind that I did not mention a BI specialist next, but the data engineer first, because they will start working on automating some of the data extraction, data cleaning process that a data analyst would use in order to be able to compute the analysis that they've been doing. The third point is whenever the data needs to be shared across the organization seamlessly with multiple users, with multiple stakeholders, needs to feel better and needs to look better, that is the moment you start thinking of getting into the team of BI specialist. As the architecture grows, there comes a point where you'll need a database administrator to kind of look out for that single source of truth. And ultimately, you will be looking out for a data scientist. And this order is not arbitrary. The reason I've added the data scientist, or machine learning engineer if you want, right, last is we believe that in order to have the confidence that you're approaching the right problem with the right tool, you firstly need to have in place a measuring framework of those key processes to understand the baseline, to understand where you are, to make some diagnostics, to understand what are the top offenders, and to isolate the exact use cases where you should deploy machine learning. And I've heard it here during several talks, right? We don't just do machine learning for the sake of doing machine learning or AI because it sounds cool, right? We need to make sure that we are employing it for the right problem. And most often than not, we used to say that why throw machine learning at a problem that you can use with a Power Pivot or an Excel pivot, right? It's cheaper, simple, and it does the job. That's it. It's not as exotic, we know, but it's the most effective. So this is why we think that data scientists should come last into the team, because they should have clarity with respect to the use cases that they should be working on. Moving on to the enterprises, and this is a very dear subject. For the first part of my career, I've worked 4 years in a couple of enterprises, and things start to grow a lot. Things start to be placed in different geographies, different infrastructures. We are faced with multi-cloud environments. We are faced with multiple teams. However, one thing that we have noticed is with enterprises, some of the tasks start taking, so the same tasks that in startups would be solved in 10 minutes, with enterprises, they can take as long as 1 month or 2 months. It's an unlimited exchange of emails because you need to find out who the owner of that system is that could provide you with the API key, with the service account, with the credentials to this GCP project, and so on and so forth. And the communication starts to be very difficult. I totally get the idea of democratizing, like building an infrastructure that would allow various users to consume the data and use the data however they see fit. However, we also believe that even for enterprises, there should be a very strategic approach to data analytics adoption. What I mean by that is usually the objectives are cascaded down through various teams, and there should be, usually there is a stakeholder, there is a champion. We have like maybe I don't know, a VP of marketing that knows that customer retention is a priority for next year, right? What we've seen is sometimes a disconnect between the business users and the IT departments that can provide the necessary support. And it's because of two reasons. Either no, I think it's mostly coming from one reason, and I think it all boils down to communication. Before any project happens, we should have the business leader talking to the IT leader, discussing that this is a priority that should be approached for the next period, for the next quarter, for the next year, and then the IT leader should provision all the necessary infrastructure and engineers and availability to support that project, right? And this is something that is not always happening, and it causes a lot of pain, and it causes projects to last way longer than they should last, right? So I guess the most important point is strategy, and there's couple of important takeaways for the business. Do we have business leaders in the room, or business users, non-technical users in the room? Okay, we don't. Okay, then, if we don't, it would have been ideal to have some business leaders in the room as well. However, as technical persons, we should always check that there is a clarity with respect to the ownership of a project, and that the availability and the prioritization has very well been communicated. And you should constantly ask yourself, why is it that I'm working on this project? How does the project I'm working on contribute to the larger objectives of the organization? Because if you don't have an answer to that, go ask your manager. And if your manager does not have an answer to that, go ask his or her manager, and so on and so forth, until it becomes very clear what is it that we improve here. Right? What is it? What is the reason that we're working on this project? Now, in terms of team, this is also a favorite subject of mine. With enterprises, there's usually the setup, the data analytics setup is called the hub and spoke type of deployment. By that, so remember that for mid-sized companies, we discussed that that is the point where they need to have access to dedicated resources or to a centralized data analytics team. Now, when we scale up to the enterprise level, the deployment is a hub and spoke. What that means is that we have a central data analytics department, and we have various, it can be BI specialists or business analysts placed in the business departments that need data analytics solution. What this model allows for is those business analysts are very close to the end users, living with them, breathing with them, understanding their day-to-day challenges, helping them with small tasks, and at the same time fishing for improvement opportunities or potential data analytics projects, right? That they can bring back to their central team, discuss them over, prioritize them, and allocate the resources. Now, the reason you need the hub is because of the economies of scale, right? That's where you'll have like the engineers, the architects, everybody, like the senior developers, and that's also usually where the acquisition should be done, because centralized acquisition would allow you to negotiate lower rates with your cloud providers, with your BI providers, and with your software providers generally, right? And this should be a constant communication. The business analyst or the data engineer or the BI specialist working in a department would go back to the central team, hey, I need a couple of licenses, and I also need a database, and I would also need a Linux server, right? Because I need to put something in place for this department here. Or, alternatively, they could go and ask for help if it's a very narrow problem that we're talking about. They could ask for help and go back to the hub for knowledge sharing or for brainstorming together on that problem, or they could reach back in order for additional resources and help from their team. So what I've seen in a multinational company that I've worked with, they had this central team, and whenever you had like a larger type of project, they would send additional developers and architects back from the hub in order to have a closer look at the data you're facing and design a solution for you, right? Okay, so we talked about team. Now, in terms of tools, I mentioned here, I mean, there's like a plethora of options. I just threw there, I've thrown there Microsoft Power BI and Tableau. Of course, there can be like plenty of data visualization tools, plenty of data analytics tools, plenty of platforms, depending on the use case, depending on the volume of data, of the performance. And I've talked about the benefits of centrally acquiring licenses, and of course you get an opportunity and an advantage from working with a single provider. However, not one single size fits all. So you might find yourself with the need or the conclusion that some other technology might be working better for your use case, and that's okay. So the central data analytics team should be experts in the various options, and they should be able to recommend the specific technology that is needed for the specific use case or the specific project that we're talking about. Okay, so yeah, and of course there will be like multi-cloud, hybrid, both on-prem, cloud environment infrastructure. It can be massive, right? Now, points to pay attention to. The first one that I started with is ensuring that analytics supports and is perfectly aligned to the business strategy and objectives. And if there's like one single idea that you should take back from this presentation, is that analytics should be a part of, aligned with, and support the strategy, not the other way around. So, also, pay attention to, as I mentioned, centralized versus decentralized analytics, and I've laid down this hub and spoke type of framework. I've laid down the option of getting multiple type of products and technologies from different providers in order to make sure that you're offering the users and the business the necessary technology to cope with their challenges. And most importantly, make sure that there's a constant communication. Another example that we've seen with very large companies is because of lack of support or lack of availability from IT, at a certain point in time, business users start to buy licenses of their own, buy solutions of their own, or go to external consultants because of lack of support and availability from their internal IT. And this creates friction. So in order to avoid that from happening, there needs to be a constant communication with respect to prioritization, with respect to sizing the team, and with respect to allocating the necessary development time and resources and engineers to the right priority. I mentioned here one size does not fit all, and that's okay. Data governance is a very important, extremely important aspect. And imagine that with enterprises, we might need collaboration between different business lines. We might need collaboration between different departments. And usually, with the users working within those departments, let's just say we're talking about logistics, supply chain, we're talking about manufacturing, and then we're talking about suppliers, right? The users working in those departments don't necessarily always know what is happening before them or after them. So they don't have this overview of how they're impacting the end-to-end process, which is why it's very important for strategic initiatives and data analytics to bring everybody around the table to make sure that everybody sees the way they are impacting each other and understand the way they are collaborating on making that process happen. I mentioned here please, at all costs, avoid slow bureaucracy, which I think, in my opinion, is the highest productivity killer. I mentioned the examples of waiting 2 months for a service account or an API key or stuff like that. And unfortunately, so I think as IT professionals, we have the responsibility to reach back to our user to understand and walk them through and explain to them, shadow them and guide them in order to understand what their need is and point them to the necessary resource or data that they need. I've heard yesterday, there was a discussion with respect to a centralized platform that you could use in order to get access to resources. And the speaker mentioned that tickets may take a long period of time if they were not written correctly or if they were not clear enough. And I think that's not necessarily the way to treat a ticket. I think you should, if you have the opportunity, reach back to your user and understand what she or he is looking for and guide them to the plethora and guide them through the analytics and the data and the databases that you're sitting on top of in order for them to find the resource that they need. I added here, ensure that all employees are aware of existing analytics, as existing capabilities, that they are aware of the existing contents of data warehouses or data lakes, that the data they're looking for might already be readily available over there without them knowing. And they spend a lot of time because they have to like manually extract the data. So walk them through what's already available, see if that helps them. What else? I mentioned the collaboration with the cross-functional project teams, especially for strategic initiatives. You need to bring all the people around the table in order to make that happen. You need the domain knowledge, you need the experts, you need the analytics, you need the IT, provisioning, infrastructure, you need everybody. However, with the risk of repeating myself, also make sure that everybody around the table knows what the objective is and what they are contributing to. Data security, this is, I mean, a topic in and of itself, but it wouldn't hurt to have, I'm not an expert in security, but what I found is that, and we also rely in our work on penetration testing and external providers that constantly try to break into our warehouses, our databases. It's a very nice thing to have. Monitor the adoption. It's very important whenever you have handed over a data analytics feature project algorithm to follow through and make sure that the users are using it to talk, to gather feedback, or if they're not using it, to understand why. Maybe there's another iteration needed. Maybe it's not as they expected it. Maybe they did not understand it, so they need to be trained, or the specific report needs to be adjusted to the way they prefer. And this is something that we've constantly trying to educate our users with respect to visual best practices. However, there is a very fine line between forcing best practices into your user and just personalizing whatever you build for them in order for them to use them, right? There's no point in making like a best practice dashboard if nobody is using it. So there's a trade-off there. And yeah, being an enterprise, you have some advantages. Keeping close touch with your tech providers, because they usually provide the latest demos, trainings, updates with respect to upcoming technologies. So being this large, you have the opportunity of keeping very up to date, getting access to alpha releases, getting access to beta releases, providing feedback. So make sure that you're using all of that in order to be sure that you are using the proper technology to solve the right solution, right? So, of course, this is like a very extensive topic, and it's impossible to make an exhaustive presentation on this, but this would be kind of the high-level overview of a roadmap to adopt data analytics for companies of different scales, together with some of the points to pay attention to. Now, thank you very much for having me, and please let me know what questions you have.
Thank you very much, Cristian. And let's see the questions. Let's hear, actually, the questions. I know you can't wait for your next coffee. That would be your 10th for today, I guess. But I was wondering, since you actually have experience with small, medium businesses and enterprise, could you share with us one of your professional, satisfying experiences with your clients? What did they ask of you, and why did you find it enriching, let's say?
Got it. So I think one of the the high satisfaction, one of the highest satisfactory projects that we are currently still working on is finally building a recommendation system for one of our customers. We've been intensely working on integrating data, building dashboards. We suggested that idea. It's been like a year before they actually considered it. We firstly had input. We couldn't like just build a recommendation and let it loose out there. So we also built monitoring for them to kind of understand the way it works and why it's recommending, what it's recommending, and monitor the ways the ways the recommendations are changing over time. And after they've become confident enough, we've just slapped an API on top of our recommendation engine, feed that into one of their products, and now they're actively using it. And we are now monitoring the effectiveness, and we're waiting for revenue and gross profit to start being attributed to those recommendations. Because we haven't this ties back to some of the presentations that I've heard in the machine learning stage. We haven't tested for its accuracy with machine learning metrics. We're actually looking at the exact revenue and gross profit that those recommendations are producing. So we'll wait and see. But
thank you very much, Cristian. So as somebody today already said, start with why, and this will bring a better result.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for all of your advice and insight.
Thank you. Thank you as well for having me.